animals that need to. So human beings can freely choose not to follow that intrinsic order. And in fact, we have done that. We have departed. We live in a world that is fallen from its original goodness. There is still a lot of good, but there's also evil. And it's all across the board. It's in us, in each one of us. Many feelings, many instincts, many thoughts, many desires are in disharmony, in disarray. They fight against each other when they were supposed to work for each other. They easily go out of place. So we easily lose the way in moral issues, and we need God to direct us. Now the problem with this disorder in our being, in our passions, is that it's hard to recognize in a good way the voice of our conscience. We should say, well, I don't need God to tell me what is right and wrong. I can listen to my conscience and that's enough. Yes, but in the state that we are, many times, that's hard to do. Many times it's easy just to listen to other passions that claim the first place. And sometimes these desires have the power to incline reason to argue in their favor instead of and against conscience. Suppose you agreed with a friend, I'm going to help you clean your apartment before your mother comes down on Saturday. And it's Friday night and I stay up late, and when my alarm clock goes off Saturday morning, I'm really tired. And it's 7:30, I say I should get up to help my friend, but my desire to sleep says, oh no, you can go on sleeping. I mean, in this state, can you really help your friend? You would be useless. And he can get help from another person maybe, and so on. But you know, those may be good reasons, but ultimately they're reasons presented by this passion. I just want to sleep in. I am too tired. But our conscience will not agree with that. If we can listen to that voice in that moment, it will say, you promised you would do it. Get up, get out of bed. You should go. You shouldn't let a friend down. But many times in our climate, it's so difficult to listen to that small voice of conscience. We are so easily confused. And we need sometimes revelation to remind us, this is still right, this is still important. A second reason why we need revelation is that the great examples from Christ, from the saints, raise the bar. Looking around us, looking at the newspaper, at the news, I could say, well, I'm a pretty decent guy. I mean, I respect people, I do good things. I'm okay. I don't need to prove anything in myself. But then we look at how great Christians live, the standards that God has set in the gospel, and I'm so short of that. I need to grow so much more. You see, revelation raises the moral standards of society. So society benefits from the faith, from revelation, in an indirect way. I do not pretend that Christian morality and Christian principles are to become like the law of the country. Christianity never pretended to be to establish a theocratic kind of kingdom or ruling. But they do exercise this great indirect benefit to all. Third section, why the supernatural or revealed absolute is needed. Why is not sufficient with just our reason, just our moral conventions. First of all, because I think it's true. It's true that God is the ultimate foundation, and God is there. Before I get to argue that the sun should rise up in the morning, the sun has already risen above my head many, many times. But I would say the main reason is the insufficiency of other foundations. We need some absolute to establish a moral direction. Otherwise, it's like trying to build this massive building on moving sand. And other absolutes are simply insufficient. Maybe they're not absolute after all, and that's why they're not enough. One that is usually used is consensus. But there needs to be something deeper than just the consensus. Because there is something like error in moral issues. We can be flawed. A consensus can be reached on an evil thing. Hitler can convince a lot of people through propaganda that it's right to exterminate Jews. And people can reach a consensus on that. That's still wrong. A think the arguments of culture and education can be traced to the same principle. We need something deeper. Genetics. There doesn't seem to be any genetic problem in individuals who disobey the moral law. Or I don't know if it's possible actually to disobey genes. It would be impossible to be immoral. Consequence is not enough just to say, well, what works best is to be moral. Sometimes it's not to your immediate advantage to be moral. I think the most convincing argument is the one that Lewis says at the end of Abolition of Man. If there is no absolute that is not determined by us, by human beings, then this will always lead to a group imposing its moral values on others. One group of people, call it scientific community, social engineers, whatever, they will determine what it means to be human and what is right and wrong. I think the only way to find an absolute that guides moral actions is to accept that there's an objective order that we human beings didn't come up with, that we discovered, just as science discovers things in nature. We don't create it, it's just there before we came. And finally, I would say that the lack of this religious foundation has usually a negative impact in society. Societies that have attempted to be founded explicitly without faith have ended in catastrophic ways and not really resulting in the benefit of humankind. I'd like to finish with this speech in this regard, a speech by Abraham Lincoln. I think many of the great men in this country who established this nation, who in a way were inspired by Christian values. He says the following on establishing the Thanksgiving Day, quote, "It is the duty of nations as well as of men to own their dependence upon the overruling power of God, and to recognize the sublime truth announced in the Holy Scriptures and proven by all history, that those nations are blessed whose God is the Lord. We have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We have been preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We have grown in numbers, wealth, and power as no other nation has ever grown. But we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. And we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It has seemed to me fit and proper that God should be solemnly, reverently, and gratefully acknowledged, as with one heart and one voice, by the whole American people. I do therefore invite my fellow citizens in every part of the United States to set apart and observe the last Thursday of November as a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwells in the heavens." And so we will. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Father Lucas. Our second speaker tonight is Dan Barker. He is co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. It's a national organization working to keep church and state separate. He's also a co-host of the national radio show Freethought Radio alongside his wife. After preaching for 19 years, Mr. Barker gave up his faith in 1983. He regularly travels the world lecturing, playing concerts, and participating in debates. He is the author of Godless, How an Evangelical Preacher Became One of America's Leading Atheists, and The Good Atheist, Living a Purpose-Filled Life Without God. This will be Mr. Barker's second appearance at the Socratic Club, after debating Dinesh D'Souza last year. Please welcome Dan Barker to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you, Socratic Club. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, Lucas. You're a very nice guy. You can see it in his face. He's a genuinely nice, good human being. It's a pleasure to know you. I had a nice trip down here. I was on a speaking tour. I was in Idaho. I was in Walla Walla. And yesterday I drove from Walla Walla down to here. I took my time. It was really nice driving along that Columbia River Highway and seeing those waterfalls and the stream. It was just gorgeous. I stopped at like a museum somewhere along the line, and I bought my wife a gift. Do you want to see it? Look at this. Pretty green, it looks kind of like a green turquoise. And it was made by a Native American. Her name is Donna Tracci from, I think they said it was from the Turtle Creek or something. But, and then I was surprised to learn the Native Americans have been living in this area at least 12,000 years, probably 15,000 years ago. And that gorge was cut. The gorge is gorgeous, that's a nice rhyme. It was cut about 15,000 years ago. There have been human beings living in this area, raising their families, loving their families, even before that gorge was cut. And I thought it was pretty amazing. The woman who made this necklace is descended from an unbroken line of humans who have been on this continent 10,000 years before the Israelites told us that before they invented the Ten Commandments, before they told us that there's some absolute moral standard. Who would dare say that the people, the ancestors, my ancestors, I belong to a Native American tribe, who would dare say that those people back then lacked an absolute or an objective basis for morality? They loved their families, they had feelings, they had a moral sense, they had a sense of fairness, they knew how to deal with cheaters, they had a sense of justice, they felt empathy, they felt altruism, they cried, they related, they were human beings. Like the rest of us are human animals. Those people evolved from earlier ancestors instincts. And I think Lucas is right to point out that we do have many instincts which we would call a moral sense that is within us. He thinks it was implanted from outside the universe. But science shows us now that the instincts that we do have didn't come from outside. They evolved from previous ancestors who, for survival reasons, found it better to be cooperative. We are social animals. We get along. Empathy is how we relate to other people. So we do come with some basic moral instincts that we can override. We now have this more recently evolved frontal lobe, which checks our instincts. It's not a spiritual thing, it's a perfectly natural thing. We can even now study empathy as a scientific fact of the brain. We can see it as a physical, material thing. It is not some spiritual, ethereal thing out there. We all have that within us. Back in the late 1980s, I was traveling to New York City to be on the Phil Donahue show to talk about the afterlife. And I was standing in line, waiting to get in the plane. This was before 9/11, before all that Homeland Security stuff. Anybody could just kind of go right up to the gate. And there was another line over here of people. They were going to get on another flight.